So yeah, in my previous video I disassembled this whole custom load bin that I've been building to paint the parts and look at a few things. And one of the things was the shock mountings, where I still had to do some work. And look where I am now. The whole back suspension disassembled. I've picked up a big problem. Hey, how's it, Oaks, and welcome back to the channel. And a special welcome to the new subscribers. Happy to see you here, man. I've picked up a big problem. Let me show you. So I unbolted the leaf springs and then dropped the frame rail to simulate the differential in a bottomed out position. You can see right there, I've just inserted one of the old bump stops, or the bump rubber, whatever you call it. So that's pretty much, I think, where the differential will sit when it's completely bottomed out. But there's a problem here with the shock mounting bracket. So you can see here, my namesake, the diff, has moved into the C-notch. But look what's happening here. The bottom shock mount bracket sits almost behind this part of the frame rail. You can't even fit a shock absorber in here. This is completely in the way. So actually the only way to rectify this would be to move this bracket out to here, and then you will be able to mount the shock absorber. So it looks to me like I'm going to have to cut this off and either make a new one or just use the existing one and move it out so that it sits here somewhere. I'm going to compress this shock absorber because I would like to confirm its minimum length. And now I'm going to try and hold it like that and stick it in my clamp here. There we go. And I'm just going to gently tighten my clamp here until the shock is fully compressed, which is that point right there. I'm actually just going to tie it with a piece of wire now to hold it in this position. It's just a temporary thing. And I'm going to show you now why I want to do all of this. Okay, that's hopefully good enough. Yeah, keeping it right there. So that's actually the minimum shock length I will have because it's fully compressed. Okay, so let's have a look at this. Let's assume the shock is mounted here, fixed point, bolted on, fixed point, bolted on. The shock is completely compressed. If this differential should move upward further, what's going to happen? We're bottoming out on the shock itself. So we definitely don't want that because we will break the shock. So we need to ensure that there's a little bit of travel left in the shock itself when the differential is fully bottomed out. So if we assume this is the end of the travel in compression, it's bottomed out. I'm going to fit the rubber here. The rubber will still compress a little bit. So my center distance between the brackets that I'm planning to build should be slightly more than this distance to ensure that I don't bottom out on the shock itself, because we definitely don't want that. Looking at the shock absorber now, it's maybe a little bit too long. I don't really want to move up much more on this side, but I will evaluate just now. I also feel this angle is a little bit too low now, so this point here must move a little bit more that way so that the shock maybe sits something like this. And here we are at the other extreme. The diff is actually hanging onto the springs again. The wheels can turn, so that's the other extreme. And the same shock fully extended. It's got more than enough travel. You can see where it goes to down there. So on that side of the spectrum, we don't have an issue. I'm stuck. So this is interesting. Have a look here. The wheels are off, so that the diff is resting on the springs, or hanging off of the springs, and the shock currently fits, no problem. But remember, in a stock truck, the differential sits below the springs, so as the diff moves down, this angle improves. So the way it sits now, it's actually would be kind of when the stock setup is already compressed quite a bit. The problem becomes in with a change in geometry when you swap or flip the diff and put it on top of the springs, like here, because now the travel is further. There's a change in geometry with this angle, and then we start fouling that point right there with the shock. So yeah, I think there's many guys out there who's done a modification like this where they've put the diff on top of the springs. They didn't bother to look at the shock business, and I'm sure they've broken quite a few shock absorbers over time. Something to be very much aware of when you plan to drop the truck in this way, by putting the differential on top of the springs. You're going to have to do something about your shock absorber mounting brackets. So with this setup, this angle change as the diff moves up becomes too much if we just use this one. It's going to become very flat. So it's critical in my mind that this position be moved further aft, something in that kind of scenario. So not only that, but because we're going to be fouling at this point, we also need to move this mounting bracket out some and have it sitting about there somewhere. So with all of that established, I'm busy grinding away the rivet heads on this upper shock mount, and once I've done that, I'll just knock them out so that I can remove it. Looks like there's a bit of countersink to them, so I'm just going to drill them first. Voila. Oops. So I'm just going to stick this frame back on here, because I just want to see how that's going to relate to the shock. Let's see now, a little bit more that way. Roughly like that. Okay. There goes my shoe, which is not a shoe. So I've got the straight edge resting on the top of the frame here. This line then will represent the bottom of the load bed liner. I don't want my shock to protrude above this point, so the top shock bracket needs to sit something like that below this line. Okay, so I've been missioning with this business for hours now. This represents the lower edge of the load bed cover, so I don't want my shock to come past this point. Just install this here temporarily. The differential is moved up into its maximum travel position, upwards compression, whatever you want to call it. And now if I put my shock in here, this represents my current shock that I have here at maximum compression. That's the shortest it can go. So if I want this to sit below that level, I don't know if you can see down there, it's too long. It sits way below the bottom end of the differential. So yeah, this plan is not going to work. This shock is too long, unless I move it up and then it sticks into the load bin. I don't want that. Unless I raise the load bin, I don't want to do that either. So it's mission aborted until I can find a shorter shock absorber. Well, luckily I've been friendly with the guy at my local Midas auto parts store over the years, so I'm sure he will exchange my existing ones for shorter versions. I need to go and see what I can find. And then it started raining, and man, did it come down. Here's a bad video of my daughter driving across the low water bridge that is already completely submerged.
Holy fuck!
Roads are washed out pretty badly in certain spots, as you can see here. So then I first had to spend some time fixing roads so that at least we could get out again. Big tree fell over as well, blocking my access here completely. So we need to cut this thing up so we can get through again. A few days later, hey, I think I might have found the right shocks. Yeah, I spent a long time with the complete Monroe shock catalogue at Midas, my local auto parts store. I sat on the floor there, paging through it, trying to find a shock with a certain compressed length and a certain extended length. I think these guys are going to do it. I've got the diff jacked hard against these rubber stops here, so it's at an extreme point. I've tied up the shock again with some wire so it's fully compressed. So I just want to see if that's going to do it. I'm still trying to aim to get this below this surface here, because this is the load bed surface. So it needs to sit somewhere there. And if I look down there, yeah, it looks good. I think this is going to work. Awesome. I just need to check the extended length, so I'm just going to drop the differential to right down onto the springs to see if the shock is long enough for the other side of the travel. That's approximately where it needs to be. So that's fully down. So let's see if the extended length will work. Still here below the surface. Roughly, that looks awesome. It's actually extended, it's quite a bit longer than it needs to be, so that's safe. Whoopee, this is awesome. These shocks are gonna work finally. Right, I've got my shocks. I must just make my brackets for up here and change it down there as well. I wonder how many times I've had this differential up and down. It's driving me insane. Just like these frogs, they're gonna make me mad too. And here is the source of the noise. Thousands of little frogs in here. Right, so I've got the diff all the way down again. shock fully extended. So if I can find my pencil, I can mark the new hole. Oh, here it is. Okay. Right, so the bracket sits there. I'm using this piece of tape here as a reference point. This way. So it needs to line up there. Now I'm going to bring my shock absorber in onto the touches here basically. Okay, so I would want it just a little bit away from the differential at that point, but this is the extreme. So I think I'm pretty safe if I just give it like a tiny little gap. Maybe like 1/8 of an inch, 3 mil or so. I reckon that's enough. Okay, careful aiming. And I'm going to mark my new hole. I can get my pencil in the space, there we go. Okay, let's see what we've got. So that's the first hole I marked, this is the second hole I marked. So I need to use this one. And not this one. So now I suppose I need to jack the diff all the way back up again, just to confirm that this hole will be good. Oh well, up we go again. Okay, jacked up all the way again. Shock compressed all the way again. Let's see how the hole is going to line up. Bracket goes there. Actually, that's not looking too bad at all. Yeah, I think it's going to work. Maybe I should just point this out. I'm in an absolute extreme position. Look here, the prop shaft is actually touching this cross member. I can't get my pencil in there. So this is a very extreme. So if the shocks will go up to this point, I will be safe. I need to ensure that my bump stops come into play way before the prop shaft touches this. So I hope this is going to make sense. This was the very first mark I made with the shock absorber under compression. My first try, C for compression. Then when I dropped the differential down and I tried to line up the shock on that mark, it fouled right here because this is where the differential sits. So that one didn't work. So with the diff down and the shock absorber extended, I marked that hole. Second attempt, extended. Shock would sit there then. But then this hole did not work under compression. When I jacked it up one more time, and when I did that, I found the third hole. And at that spot, that's my sweet spot, the third try. At that position, the shock fits under extended conditions and under compressed conditions. So how many times have I had this diff up and down? 437 and something. Holy cow. But there, that's going to be my final hole. So this is going to be my bracket. I'm just going to cut it out to a nice shape now. So maybe I should just add something at this point. The methods I employ here are according to the principles of highly scientific forest engineering. So yes, keep that in mind. And here's my final pattern. I had to provide a little bit of clearance here for the shock absorber to move through its motion, because it goes to about that position. So this just needs to clear this part of the shock. I'm just going to cut this out of 1/4 inch plate now, 6mm plate. And through the powers of YouTube, 2 identical brackets magically appear. So I've already cut off the old bracket. I'm just grinding the welds now. Okay, so I've got my brackets bolted onto the shock. I've got everything held in place with a piece of wire here. It all checks out. It all lines up. So I'm just going to tack my brackets onto the diff now. Just do light tacks. So I can check things out. Crawled in here. Right, here goes. And another one on that side. Okay, that should hold it. Get my sorry ass out of here. So yeah, I think my shock is finally in place. I've got the two brackets up here, lightly tacked in place so that I could move them around a little bit, play with the angles. I've got the bottom one tacked on, both of them. And there it finally sits. Does look a bit close here. But there's actually a gap there of maybe about, I don't know, almost a quarter of an inch. And the diff is all the way down. There's no ways it can touch. I've had the bloody thing up and down 1,000 times. I've checked everything out, so it's all good. So yeah, now I've just got to weld up these brackets fully. And then repeat the exercise on the other side. Holy cow. Okay, from the top looking down. That's the view. I'll tell you something. This bloody yellow thing here was trying very hard to beat me. Both mentally and physically. Mentally because of all the angles involved and the travel lengths, compressed lengths and all that. Physically because my back is almost finished. But stuff you, Charlie, I got it. Okay, so I've got the diff turned upside down, so I can weld up this bracket. I've installed this bolt here with some nuts, tighten it all up so I can keep that distance apart, fixed, so the shock will fit and everything is nicely lined up. I'm also going to add a gusset plate right here to beef things up a little bit more. So the upper shock mount does get some support by the load bed here, but I thought I would give it some additional bracing, like so. Yeah, it's quite an intricate bracket. I wonder what Uncle Ford would have said about that. Check it out, man. Fully welded, painted. I've got the shock absorbers fitted. So the shooting angle does make it look like the shocks are sitting parallel, but they are actually slanted inwards. There's one more thing left to do before I can call this job done. So the U-bolts are not on yet, and I'm now going to jack the differential up just to take the shock through its motions. The differential will probably rotate a little bit because the shocks are trying to push it back, but still, let's check it out. So the diff is jacked up all the way. The shocks are looking good. We've taken it through the shock motion from fully compressed to fully extended. That all looks great. The diff can't go higher than this point though. This represents the bottom of the load bed and it's just clearing here. And at that same point, the prop shaft is clearing this cross member by maybe half an inch, thickness of my finger. I had to tie it up with a piece of rope because the backwards pressure of the shock absorbers wants to rotate the diff at the moment. And here in the C cut or C notch, that's the gap I currently have. So now if the diff was to go any higher, the prop shaft would actually touch that cross member and the top of the diff would hit the load bed. So I need to put in a bump stop here and stop it at this point. It cannot go any higher than this point, otherwise I will break things. So I must make sure that my bump stop that I install right here stops the diff at this point, no higher. These are the original bump stops. So it fits in easily, but it will also still get compressed. So I'm going to actually have to do a slight modification right here to make sure this is all going to work. It's just a little dirty, but I think it's still serviceable, so I might just clean it up a bit. I've extended the stud on it so that it's now this long. My plan is to bolt it right through, so it will come out on top here with a nut. But it's still sitting quite loosely in here, and it will still compress. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to weld in a piece of plate like this. This is just a template. A piece of 1/4 inch plate like that. I'm going to weld that in. And then you'll see that brings the attachment point down by maybe 1/2 inch or so, which I think will be enough for the compression. And then the bump stop can sit against the plate. We'll go through this hole, through the member here with a nut on top. I think that's going to work. Right, so let's drop it back down. Now I've got a bit of space here to work in, eh? Drill this hole right through the plate that I've just welded in. Okay, I cleaned up the rubber some just for pretty. So my modified bump stop now goes through that hole. So, nut on top. And Bob's your uncle. So yeah, if I misguessed on my compression here, and it compresses more than the 1/2 inch I allowed for, well, then the diff will hit the load bed, the prop shaft will bump against that cross member. What's the worst case scenario? I might even break a shock. Only one way to find out. Might only probably happen, if ever, when I hit that serious pothole at high speed. So if that should ever happen, it will be a simple matter to just add a spacer in here, or even a completely different bump stop. Yeah, I know I should cover this in on both sides. It'll probably look a little bit better. I seriously don't think it's necessary from a strength point of view. I think this is more than strong enough. But I'm going to leave it exactly as it is. My back is finished, so I'm not going to do it. Hey, you still here? Thanks for staying with me, man. It's certainly been a journey, but it's mission accomplished as far as the shocks are concerned and the bump stops are concerned. I'm not going to put the wheels back on yet. I've still got to play with pinion angle, engine alignment and all that sort of good stuff. So that should be in a future video, should be interesting. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you then.